Katey McPherson is an experienced school leader, former administrator, and passionate advocate for strengthening schools through courageous, community-centered leadership. Throughout her career in education, Katey has worked at the intersection of school culture, leadership development, and community engagement, helping leaders navigate complex challenges while staying grounded in purpose and people. Katey brings a powerful leadership lens to conversations about safety, belonging, and organizational change. She understands firsthand the pressures school leaders face and the critical role they play in shaping not just policy, but culture. So today, we're going to explore what it means to lead through a community-centered lens, exploring how former and current school leaders can leverage local momentum, build coalitions, and create meaningful change that strengthens both safety and connection. We'll also examine how this leadership mindset aligns with our mission at Safe and Sound Schools to empower every community to protect and support every student, every school, every day. Welcome, Katey McPherson.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me here today.
We are so excited to have you. Feels like we've been having a lot of conversations lately. So we're excited to introduce you to the rest of our community. A few of them got a taste of you at one of our recent summits. And so it's really exciting to kind of bring this to the larger community on the Sound Off.
Yeah, it was an awesome summit.
It was good. It was good. So before we dive in to leadership frameworks, system level change, all the good stuff that I'm dying to ask you about, what's something about you that people might not know, but that deeply influences how you approach this work? What's your superpower?
So I get asked often if I was bullied because I do so much work around that topic and mental health. And like a lot of what I post about, a lot of what I speak on centers around dignity. But I actually didn't have much of that kind of stuff growing up. I had some typical stuff. This one guy, Joe, would always make fun of me in high school, but, I self-advocated. But I think when people ask me that, it really comes from my parents. My dad was chief prosecutor in Detroit for a long time. So as a tiny person, between 3 and 5 years old, I remember watching him prepare for his cases. And then somewhere along the way, around 10 or 12, I went down to the courthouse and watched him in action. And then he went into private practice. So I saw him advocating for families. He did family law. So after school, every day I would walk to his office during middle school and then he'd drive me home. So, and then in high school, I did some clerking at his office, filing and stuff. And then my mom was a teacher and my stepmom is a social worker. And so between all of them, I really just saw just such a passion for advocacy. So I don't think a lot of people know about my parent background.
Okay, so this explains so much. I've known you for years and years, and I just look at you as this force. You are a fierce advocate. So I get there's part lawyer, part teacher, part social worker. There's mom in there. I mean, people should know not to mess with Katey. And you are such an advocate for our kids, such an advocate for community members, and our shared goal of school safety. So it's quite a DNA helix that you just laid out there and explains everything to me.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to, when I saw that question on the guide, I was like, yeah, where does this come from?
Yep.
So it's nice to be able to pay homage to them.
Oh my gosh, you do it every day. It's brilliant. Yeah. It's brilliant. All right, so that kind of leads us into the first question I want to ask you. So it's a good segue into the meat of our conversation. But as a journey from being a tiny person, as you, and you're still a tiny person, by the way.
Still
but as a little, growing up, what made you decide to begin your journey in education? I mean, I think obviously having inspiration from mom had to weigh into it, but into education and then administrator and all the things that happened to today where you are this national voice, what kind of experiences shaped you along the way?
I think probably my mom. I mean, my mom taught French for 40 years, but she also taught in our basement. Like we had an after school group of my friends that she taught French to. Just watching the joy that she created teaching. And then she would bring her students, they were high school students over every summer. She took a bunch of students to France for a month and put them in homestays and traveled all over. And just seeing the opportunities that teaching and education give you, not only to make impact, but also to inspire, I think is absolutely why I pursued that. I did start at Michigan State as a pre-law major, and my dad was like, I don't know if I would recommend that for you. And I was like, why? And he's like, it's really tough for women in law right now at the time. And he's like, it's not that I don't think you can do it, but he's like, it's a tough road. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I could do something in that vein. And I think that's where this has led me. And then having my own children, having my own children and hearing the things that go on at school, especially now that they're in high school and college, like the abyss that these children are living in, whether you're third grade, fifth grade, eighth grade, 12th grade, like it is different. And so currently and most recently in the last 10 years, that's really what has propelled me to leave the school district and just go on the road locally and regionally and now nationally. Um, they need a voice. Our students deserve a voice. And so I feel like teaching, when you're in front of a classroom, you are a public speaker. So like that didn't come so hard, right? Like I still get nervous, but the speaking part comes easy. I think my dad's passion for advocacy, like people ask me all the time, like, aren't you afraid to go up against like some of these leaders and ask for this? And I'm like, no, like I mean, yeah, is it uncomfortable sometimes? Yes, but I'm not afraid. And I really just bring that back to, again, my family. Like my stepmom's favorite line is like, be strong and be brave, like shoulders back, forge ahead. And
Mhm.
so, with the three of them behind me, and my stepdad is also a fantastic person who, his tagline is change is a process, not an event. And so, with the four of them, like constantly over the years saying those things, like it just wasn't afraid to kind of push out there.
It stuck. It shows, and it's
Yeah.
gosh, like I said, it just explains so much. I think it's so interesting what you say about the speaking. I had the same kind of revelation, like pushed into this work. It just kind of evolved in this way where I do an awful lot of speaking and training, and I remember being uncomfortable with it conceptually, like I'm not a speaker, And then, it dawned, hey, what you spoke every day, all day for years and years and years as a teacher. And this is really just teaching. So it kind of becomes your style of speaking, right? You may not be up there TED Talk style, right? But it's really just the power to convey ideas and get people thinking and using their brains. That an educator can do, right? It's amazing. And I think it's amazing to leverage those skills in the way that you have to get people to think differently about leading meaningful change in their communities for the safety of students and the safety of the school community. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the idea of getting folks to step into change. And I mean, that's just hard. Whatever the change is that you're aiming for, we talk a lot about it. We talk a lot about what needs to be done. We admire the problem a lot in our schools and communities, but you're not somebody who will sit around and do that. You're somebody who will get right there in the mix and get face to face. I guess part of that DNA that you're talking about, just not being afraid to face down the problem, and that's a really powerful thing, I think. a lot of times in the community, you have a lot of people who are willing to step and do the right thing, but they need somebody else to kind of confront the bully in the room first and get that going. So how do you help communities do that? Like what is it about? Because I've seen it happen live with you. And it takes it. I'll say it's clear it takes time. But what is the process of helping people get to this mentality of meaningful change versus just let's just manage the problem. Let's just keep the ship floating. How do you do
Yeah, I think for me, leaning on subject matter experts, really using your network, meeting new people in ways that maybe aren't conventional. I'll give you an example. So we had, as you know, a cluster of youth suicide in our region that was just nonstop. And everybody was sort of frozen. Like, I'm not sure people realized how bad it was. And it was really bad for a long time. And so one night, I literally just emailed the president of Arizona State University. And I think the title was something outlandish, like Dead Kids in the East Valley. Like like
I
it
need
was
you to pay attention. Yeah, pay attention.
something not very graceful. But I was so frustrated and so sad and so mad. And I was like, listen, I'm an alum. I got my grad degree there. I teach for you. I have kids coming to you in a few years. Like, I know you're an amazing leader in our state. I've seen the things that you've done. We need your help in the East Valley. And within like 6 hours, he responded and was like, I want you to meet with Dr. Aaron Cross now. He's our associate VP for health and wellness. I met with Aaron, and like within an hour and a half meeting with him, he had laid out what he what is and what he uses as the public health model approach to wellness, which is, we have well-being, we have distress, and we have crisis, which lines up with prevention, intervention, and postvention, which I hadn't even heard the word postvention before. And I had been in education for over 20 years. I was like, oh, like I know that's a thing, but I didn't have a name for it. And
Yeah.
so I think leaning on experts, not going at it alone, not being afraid to cause good trouble. That's what I call what I do sometimes is
I
causing
love
good
that.
trouble.
Good.
And I will tell you, there are people that don't like me, and I'm okay with that. Maybe because I'm old, maybe because of my DNA, but it wasn't always that way. But being brave enough to start the conversation with people that know way more than you. Additionally, on that suicide front, I got on LinkedIn and literally Googled like suicide prevention experts. And I landed on Dr. Max McGee, who was state superintendent of instruction for Illinois, at the time superintendent for Palo Alto School District. He had had 6 suicides in one school year on the train tracks behind Pali High. And he with Stanford and the city of Palo Alto came together with this amazing network called Project Safety Net, which is still in place. And he was able to just revamp high school education in Palo Alto and became an expert himself in suicide prevention. And so I was able to invite him here, and we hosted several town halls, and he met with superintendents. And because of his credibility, they listened to him. And because I got to listen in, I became a better person for it. And so I think leaning on experts, really hosting listening sessions, and not being afraid to ask people that know more than you, I think is a super important quality if you're looking to invent change.
So I think that's a powerful thing. We all know, can't be a prophet in your own land, right? We've lived that. I know you've lived that kind of locally. The same message that you give in your hometown and the way it's received, when you go to a community just, I don't know, an hour and a half away, right? People are drinking what you have to say in
Yeah.
that context. But if you're a mother in the community, I mean, it's like you're immediately kind of downgraded. If you're a parent in the community and you're saying the same things. So I think that is one of the things I've seen you do time and time again. You'll reach out to us. We have this problem. Michele, who do you have that can come and deliver some lived experience around this and show the path to our community? I saw you do that with Michele Denault. Just this is a hard conversation that we need to have in all of our schools about the realities around grooming and overcoming that not here kind of a mindset and bringing somebody in to literally just shatter that status quo to make energy and momentum for what needs to happen. And I think it all comes around this idea of vision, right? I think when I look at leaders in communities, I see two types. I see those who really are, they're in there to just keep it from blowing up. Just keep it together is kind of the goal. And then there's others who are like you, they'll just run headlong into the hard stuff because there's a vision there. How is it that you get to a place as a leader where you can, because I think they all see it, I think they all have the vision. But how is it that one can overcome that, I think, human tendency to just stay where it's comfortable, right? Like we're going to stay here until it's a problem. I see it bubbling in the pot, but it's not really boiling yet. So I don't have to worry about it yet.
Yeah, I think it's really hard nowadays. The day job of a teacher, an administrator, a paraprofessional is overwhelming. I mean, the acuity of our students that are coming to us, whether they're 8 years old or 17 years old, is very high. And so I think there's this notion around like, I can't do one more thing. But what they don't recognize, and this is the beauty of stepping out of the school districts where I can see the vision more clearly, I can see the issues more clearly, is really data and surveys and listening to children. Like when I was looking over the guide for the questions for today, I kept writing down the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Like, listen to the children, talk to the children, stay current and relevant. I think that's another huge issue is there's this huge gap between an administrator who maybe grew up like I did in the 80s and early 90s and now, and like staying current in like the current abyss of what our kids are going through, the stressors that they face. I think recognizing that prevention is so important to your livelihood, the livelihood of you yourself as a leader, but the livelihood of your community, the wellness of your community. And I joke around sometimes that like the things that I'm suggesting that people do are not lofty. And that I have said to more than one person, I'm trying to save you from yourself. I guarantee if you do this thing, that this other thing won't happen. But if you wait for the other thing to happen, it definitely will happen. It will be bigger than you think. And sometimes they believe me and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they blow me off. Sometimes they're like, let's get to it. But I think just recognizing the space that we're currently in is not going to get better overnight.
Mm-mm.
It's not going to get better without some hard work. And so really having to dig in, stay relevant, and make sure that kids are part of your weekly survey. Like have lunch with a couple of them, go play on the recess playground and ask a few questions. Like I think that's the huge part missing is nobody's talking to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a ton of adults sitting around round tables. Like, I think this will be good. I think let's try that.
And many of those things, as you point out, they're coming from our experiences. We're adults now and we're looking back, oh, I remember this worked really well, that kind of a thing. And to your point, it's really not the same at all. It is
No.
such a vastly different growing up than what we experienced. And it's I think impossible to appreciate it. I really do. The only way you can come to understand even just a little bit is by talking to the students, hearing what their experience is. It's absolutely eye-opening. I think maybe folks don't want to have their eyes open at times. It's hard, like I said, to kind of stare at the bully in the room, which I'm referring to as the problem, whatever it may be. But really, really being able to listen and appreciate the landscape as it is. And you mentioned prevention in all areas of what we refer to as school safety. That's the place we want our communities to be. We'd really rather you be in a ready stance, because you have done the work of looking ahead at, wow, if I don't do X and Y and Z, I'm going to be looking at A and B and C happening, and it's an inevitability. So how can I get us to a better place? And that energy comes down to prevention, right? It gets us out of this reactive kind of stance and into this very proactive stance. But I think, easier said than done, right? So you said you're comfortable, and I think this is great. These are words of wisdom. Comfortable with the idea that people won't like you. And that's a tough thing to put on for a person, especially a female leader. I'll say many of us are raised to be pleasers. And I'll throw some of our male counterparts in there as well, right? Being a leader in a community is one of those things that requires that people like you, they'll follow you, right? So I want to do the things that they want in order to be liked, and yet that can be our kryptonite there. So how do you deal with the loneliness aspect?
Yeah, it's not easy, I will say. At first, I had a colleague tell me that someone from a district had pulled her aside and was like, hey, like, I know that you're friendly with Katey. Watch out for her. She's dangerous. And I was like, well, that's so interesting, because in that particular district, I was advocating for safety-related items, safety-related trainings, upholding the dignity of students, listening to parents. And so,
Dangerous, Katey, very.
So, I was laying awake one night, like tossing and turning, like not really loving being called dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really, like, truly, like, at first glance, like, okay, that's not good that people think I'm dangerous. But then after a few days kind of chuckling, like, okay, well, if I'm dangerous because I'm advocating for student safety, so be it. If I were to die tomorrow, I hope somebody puts on my tombstone, she was dangerous. But yeah, it's super lonely. Like, I have lived on an island for a long time. And until recently, in the last like 5-10 years, haven't really had success in, this groundswell of mom support, like moms coming together for the suicide prevention, moms coming together for the teen violence that happened in our town. A few dads sprinkled in there, but until those groups came along and I aligned myself with people like you and Not My Kid and Common Sense Media and like other groups, like you really have to go do the networking yourself and find like-minded people, because it can be an island. And I had a mom recently that I've been helping with a very serious situation that happened on a school campus. And she was like, how do you do this? How do you do this every day? These people are so frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And like, because when I get overwhelmed or tired or like, I don't know if I can fight this anymore, I think about that one kid that we helped that got to the other side, that family that got to the other side, and that, maybe tomorrow isn't going to be my day to fight, but maybe in a few days I'll have the stamina to try again.
Mm-hmm.
But it is lonely. It's lonely work. And so for any leader that is feeling that, I would suggest that they do some networking and find some like-minded colleagues. And it may not be in your district. It may not even be in your town. It could even be something online. But finding people who have waged the war and maybe have some battle wounds, but have had success. I mean, that's really where my success has come from, is finding people that also were able to stir a little bit of good trouble up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, love it. I love that. You mentioned a couple key people that are important leaders in our community. I think a lot of people were talking about your experiences as an educator, a school leader, and now a leader on the national level. But you mentioned paras and teachers specifically a few sentences ago. I'd even throw in, some of our bus drivers, our administrative staff, our nurses, our librarians, all of them also leaders, right? So if you're listening today to the sound off and you're thinking, well, I'm not an administrator. This conversation isn't for me. I would say nothing's further from the truth. Look at me. I'm a classroom teacher, right? I still identify. I've been out of the classroom for a long time. And yet it was in me. It was in me. And so I hope everyone listening is able to realize, like, you don't have to have some sort of title that anoints you leader. It's really just somebody who's willing to lean into the tough stuff, right? So what would you say, Katey, to many of our other folks who are literally leading where they stand and doing the work of moving the community to meaningful change, just 1 inch at a time?
I think, as my stepdad always says, change is a process, not an event. Like, the baby steps that I have taken in, that suicide prevention, that teen violence, like the bullying prevention, the digital wellness, the things that I'm passionate about. Like, I started that as an after school club called Girl Power. Like, girls in my class that I taught at the middle school were having issues. And so one day after school a week, they would come and we would just gather and talk about, like, how hard it was to be a middle school girl, right? And, like, from there, we started doing, like, weekend hikes. And after that, they started doing philanthropic events on their own. And, like, it can be a librarian, it can be a para, it can be a bus driver, leading change in itty bitty ways that maybe feel small, but are, like, such a tremendous impact. When you talk to kids about who was your person, who were your people, they're all sorts of people. They are the bus driver. My crossing guard from when I was 5 to at least 11, like Mr. Redmond, like, every morning he was like, Katie, like, he the day. He started the day. Like, those little things that we do are change. They inspire. And so I would say, where you stand today, you have amazing impact and power. And if you have an idea, if you have a process, if you have a system that you think would make life better, take that baby step, even if it seems like a mountain.
Well said. You also mentioned a very key group, and you've mentioned them several times in this conversation, but students. So when I think about your Girl Power Club that you started, whether you realized it or not, you were standing up and preparing leaders. The natural byproduct of coming together, sharing our experiences, looking for solutions is fostering leadership. And that is exactly what happened with those girls, right? They went off to do good in their community, to wage change in small ways, I'm sure at first. But I'd bet that today they're carrying that forward because somebody believed in them and somebody believed that they could be leaders as well.
Yeah. And, I got pushback about it. I had to do it. It wasn't a formal club. Like, I wasn't being paid. It was, just something I did on my own time, which I was happy to do. But I mean, that is an example of, like, it may not be some formal thing. It can be your own thing. And it may not be on campus, maybe off campus as well. But, another example of the student thing that I think is so powerful. So there were a group of moms that went to the board meeting over and over, myself included, regarding the suicides and, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And there was extreme resistance to even the word suicide at the time. There were a group of students who formed their own nonprofit in high school, Arizona Students for Mental Health. And they started going to the board meetings. And there were about 10 of them at the tiny microphone for 3 minutes during public comment. And, there were a few boys, mostly girls, but a few boys who, were chiming in about like, this is really hard and I've had mental health issues. And I think they went, I'm not joking, at least 12 times to the board meeting, which only happens once a month. So they also joined forces with this huge faith-based group called VIP. And so VIP and these students, they are the reason that we have a leading suicide risk assessment center in the parking lot of one of our high schools. There's only 2 in the nation, one in Perrysburg, Ohio, and one in Chandler, Arizona. And it was founded by David Jobs, who's the author of the CAMS model, which is the assessment that we use to figure out if a student is at risk for suicide. Like, he's a really big deal. Kids made that happen. Moms, we were not successful as moms in getting leaders to listen. The children were. And I think that was so awesome to see. And so I would encourage any child, young adult that's listening, like, you too can be a part of that change. It's not just adults. Those were high school kids, and they have continued that work.
Amazing. And I think you can't not get behind the kids, right? So if we give voice to our kids, you say as moms we were not successful, but I bet a lot of the reason those kids were able to get up and do that work, to go repeatedly, there were moms behind them, there were dads behind them, driving them to those board meetings, meeting with them, helping them prepare, fostering within them that leadership that could not be denied. You can't deny the kids, so
Yeah.
incredible. And it's really, it's long-term work, and it's exciting to hear an example like that, because that's an example of work that was started and continues to this day, right? That's live to this day. Those kids have graduated. They may have even left the community, and yet they've left this living, breathing cultural change that happened in the community. And to get there, there's a fair amount of trust building. There's a fair amount of that kind of belonging. And I think those are the ingredients that we can give to our kids to put them in a position where they can step up like that. So let's talk a little bit about that. There's urgency to all of these topics in school safety, whether we're talking suicide prevention, violence prevention, and any number of challenges that we've got in our schools today. But there is this, I feel like, a little tug of war between the urgency and the sort of the long-term, brick by brick cultural change that is required to make something like that last.
Yeah, I think a timeline, building a timeline, a realistic timeline, knowing things probably aren't going to change overnight. Even with a drastic situation like you've been through or we've been through here with the teen violence, like that was one of the learnings. Like, I went to the city council meeting and was like, what are we going to do? Like, we have this thing, we have to do something. Like, I was a little off kilter probably in retrospect. Yes, very dangerous. They did not respond at all. So like my sense of urgency landed 0, nowhere. We continued as a group called the Upstanders to go to city council meetings to do, like our sense of urgency was like, we have this huge teen violence problem. Like, we have to fix it overnight. And I think looking back, if we had probably asked for a private meeting and then recognized what people are able to do. So a key learning for me is like, cities and towns do not budget for youth. We have like youth parks and rec, but there's nothing in most city and towns budgets for youth mental health. So they were like, we already have the budget established. Like, where are we going to get this money for what you're like? We think that's great, what you're trying to do, but where are we going to get this money, right? And so knowing sources of funding and understanding the pace of that is lower than molasses. And so if I had to go back on the teen violence front, I would have built a realistic timeline of because that not only increased my endurance and stamina to see the long haul, it just makes you feel better when you're realistic about, okay, here's the end goal. How are we going to get there? What are those tiny baby steps that we can take? And then recognizing your urgency is not theirs. And that's unfortunately just how it goes. And being able to swallow that and be like, okay, the system is old and it's reactive, not proactive. That's pretty much how it is across the country. I think were key learnings for me is that you might not always get what you want on your timeline, but again, eventually we were able to get the things that our town needed. It just might not be on the same timeline.
So I think that's really interesting what you say about, your urgency is not theirs. I think sort of growing up as a human in education, very formative years for me. Literally, I was still a kid when I started at 21, right? And so my frontal lobe was still in progress as I'm moving through, and I feel like essentially growing up in that environment, it became very clear to me, and I think a lot of educators realize this. You try enough times, you watch enough of folks really stand up and be urgent, be even dramatic at times, and how likely it is to fail because of just that. And I think after our tragedy, a lot of people were just totally, utterly confused about the approach that I was taking around these conversations. Like, how come you're not marching on the Hill? How come you don't have a sign with your daughter's picture and name and an angry statement? Like, how come you're not angry? And I'm like, I'm angry. I'm so
Yeah.
angry, but I'm realistic here. I can do all that and I'll get their attention for a hot minute. And then as soon as I leave the room, everyone's going to go back to, oh, that was so heartbreaking, and then go right back to where that comfort stance was, right? So I think really keep that urgency as your fuel. You're going to need it for the long haul if you're going to make that kind of cultural change. You also mentioned, gosh, the timeline is brilliant. I'm going to go back and share it with Missy on our team. Missy Dodds has done so much incredible work in her community, leveraging her experiences. And it's so interesting. It kind of mirrors what you're describing. She took her story outside of the community, and she found a whole community of people that would support her and help her develop a strategy and a plan. And essentially, I realize now a timeline. What are the itty bitty steps that you can make? Because she was like, you know what happened here in this community. You know what happened to me. And yet you're able to somehow look away. My urgency is not your urgency, right? So setting forth that really clear timeline. And you mentioned, facts, data, right? People can't run away from that. So, setting your urgency aside maybe, and really taking that fact-based, that expert base will bring other people in, to really support this message and this work. And incredible ingredients, I think, for that change that can happen in our communities. There's one other one, though, that I want to talk about that we haven't gotten into, and that is vulnerability. I have listened to you speak and train multiple times over the years, and I feel like that is one of the things, and I'd point back to Missy with this too. Getting up before people and laying it out there in all of its ugliness it's a pretty powerful thing, right? It's like, I don't have all the answers, but here's what I do have. So would you speak to that a little bit as a leader? How have you leveraged vulnerability?
I think really, I've really dug into that, just on a personal level. For a long time, I followed Brene Brown and all of her work around that, and really digging into what works with kids And one of the therapists in town, his name's Travis Webb, and he does a ton of work around trauma. And in one of his trainings, he talks about V plus V equals C, which is vulnerability plus validation equals connection. So I think that's what people appreciate about me when I present really hard, ugly things that, our local area's been through is like, so if she's willing to get down and dirty, like maybe I can too. And she's validating what I already know to be true. And so I feel like sometimes I connect with, certain audiences or even members of an audience. I shared with you earlier, like a counselor in Wisconsin came up to me and was like, you were talking about students fitting in versus belonging. I'm having that issue in the mom community. Like my kids have just left for college. I'm feeling kind of lonely. You were talking about fitting in versus belonging in the mom community. Like it's heart and tears streaming down her face. I think the ability to get down and dirty and be vulnerable is like the essence of being human. And when you're able to convey that in small moments or big moments in front of big stages or in a, microdose, so to speak, I think that's so powerful. And it's really what I love about this work and what keeps me going because there are audiences that are kind of like, you know, like they're like, oh, that was good, and then somebody will grab me after and have a moment like that where you're like, okay, that was my one person. That was, that person is going to take that and that was validating for them. And hopefully, that shared experience that we just had will give her inspiration to keep going. Because it is lonely, no matter what community or, the school community, the admin community, the teaching community. Like there are those moments where you're like, am I alone in this? Like I feel very alone in this.
And that
Um,
counselor that you're describing was feeling that loneliness, just feeling I'm on an island, and the power of connecting with that person now has planted a seed, right, in the community, has empowered a person, has given that person the knowledge, like, I see you. You're not crazy and you're not alone. And you should keep going, right? You should find the like-minded travelers that are going to join with you. And it's a very real and powerful thing. After being vulnerable, and I'll say for my part, sharing with full transparency, experiences, and after presenting, it's obviously it's very common. People come up to you afterwards. They are looking to kind of cement that connection that they felt because you were willing to be vulnerable. They're going to come up and be vulnerable now, right? And for some, it's wow, that was amazing, and they're going to just kind of take that and tuck that away. And then for others, it's like, oh my gosh, what you said spoke to me, and it's such a humbling thing because it may not even have been sort of the original purpose of your message, but because you were able to connect with that person through your vulnerability, now they are empowered. They are prepared to lead where they stand in the community. It's a remarkable thing, Katey.
yeah, I'm thinking as you're talking about, so there was a man, I was in Wisconsin at a school safety conference and they were all pretty much police officers, safety directors, a few facility managers. But, this guy came up to me, he was probably in his late 50s and his eyes were full of tears. And he said, my daughter's in high school and what you were talking about with like the Instagram and being excluded and like the nasty rumors that go around, he was like, I'm dealing with that right now. And he had his badge on and he was like, look at this badge. I have had this badge for 30 years. I have worked in violent crimes. I've worked in ICAC. I've worked in awful, awful situations and I've never cried. And he's like, I'm on the verge of tears this morning because I don't know what to do. And so we strategized around this awful situation, awful rumors about his daughter. Today's her birthday. He's like, I don't even want to go home because it's her birthday Monday. And I don't know what to say to make it feel better, And so those moments for him, like that was like so powerful, right? That like this 45-minute talk I gave about fitting in versus belonging, hit a guy who's seen a lot in a different spot. And so I would just encourage anybody, we have to be more human. We have to keep the connection going because life is busy and stressful. And especially if you work in a school, your day job is enormous.
So let's bring it back to our leaders where they stand, whether you're a bus driver, whether you're a facilities director, custodian, nurse, wherever you stand in the community, mom, student. We do have students that listen to these conversations. How, as we look at the broader national landscape, do we tap into opportunity for those local boots on the ground leaders? Because I feel like that's actually the hardest position to be in, right? And I think you would agree with me. We can go out nationally and have this conversation and get a groundswell of support. We can go help in another community, and I mean the progress that they'll experience is, it's amazing. You've accelerated their timeline essentially by being that expert that came in to validate what the local experts are doing and experiencing and working on every day. So for those folks listening, where do you see the greatest opportunity to influence really meaningful progress around school safety, student well-being, all of these really important and tough conversations that we have to have?
I think the lunch table, the teacher's lounge, wherever you eat. I mean, really, those are the opportunities where all those different parties get to interface. And I know the bus drivers kind of like to hang by themselves. But when I was in Scottsdale Unified, like the bus drivers' titles were transporter of learners. Like you are the first thing that kids see in the morning. And so those lunch table conversations, I wish those people would spend more time like having lunch with admin, having lunch with superintendency. Like their ideas are so important, right? And maybe they don't feel valued enough, feel seen enough, feel heard enough. And so creating an opportunity for lunch with decision makers, with students, just more connection. I think the school day sometimes does not lend itself to the meeting of the minds and the cross section of people that have these amazing ideas, right? My work is generally pretty reactive in that like something happens and they call Katey, right? These people are in it. They have ideas. I don't know if we encourage them enough to meet with us, to come forward, to create their own girl power group, to create their own, I mean, one of the things we're dealing with in our community is boys. Like we have boys destroying things. We have boys, our marketplace where there's like these huge, big box stores, Target and In-N-Out Burger, all these things. Like we've had to go to like 6 p.m. You have to be with an adult because there are so many kids on e-bikes and little scooters and however they get there, bored. And so really like these groups that you're talking about, like how do we create opportunities at school and outside of school for these kids to combat boredom if they're not in an organized activity or sport? Maybe parents can't afford it because it's super expensive. Like, are these the type of people that we could get together and create something great? I think the lunch table would be where I would love to see more mixing. Like, we do mix it up lunch for kids all the time where you can't sit with your own table. Like maybe we need an adult mix it up lunch.
I love it. I love it. So basically where the food is, I'm down with that, right? Like if you want people to come to the meeting, make sure there's food. But it is like, it is, and for some of us, it's like 15 or 20 minutes. It's pretty quick. But it is a moment in time in the day and all of the craziness of the day where you do let your hair down a little bit. You do shed your teacher, principal, counselor, student hat. You just get to be real with whoever is sitting with you. And so it's a unique opportunity to come out of your silo and just be real together and confront these difficult things in our communities and problem solve. And it's so funny that you say that because I remember as a kid a lunch conversation with our music teacher. She was planning the program for graduation. And for whatever reason, she had the brilliant idea to do something that had never been done ever in any of all the academic years in my schooling. And she just wanted to sit down with a group of us and hear what we had to say. What songs do you like? What are you interested? What do you think? How do you think this should go? This is what I'm thinking. And what a I remember it to this day. I remember it to this day because like we had voice. Somebody wanted to hear what we had to say, and it was like, I see you. It was just this incredible moment in time. So that is a phenomenal idea. Looking for,
Yeah, I think like at your summits, like maybe mix
as
it up lunch. Like you're not allowed to sit with the people you came with.
I just
I don't know
love
how you
it.
feel about that, but like
I love
I
it.
think
They're gonna hate it. They're gonna hate it, but then they're gonna love it, right? They're gonna love it. They're gonna meet so many interesting people. It's kind of like when we do our little our kind of our pop-up hot topic tables. We send people around to randomized groups to talk about different things. And boy, people at first they're like, wait, I have to move. I have to move from the seat that he's picked out for, this is my spot. But wow, the stuff that comes out of those conversations is absolutely incredible. So if you had just 60 seconds here to sound off directly to all the leaders listening here today, Katey, who feel probably overwhelmed, probably stuck, maybe recognizing that they've been looking at the problem the same way for a long time, or maybe they have carried the ball and they've carried it really far and they're whooped. What would you want them to understand about their power to create community change?
I think first and foremost, taking care of yourself, both physically and mentally, is so important. But then again, I think I go back to the timeline. Like if there's something that you want to execute, whether it's this year or next year, what's one thing that will move you forward? You don't have to do it all. You don't have to do it alone. But what's one tiny thing when you get that stamina and that endurance back, which means taking care of yourself, decompressing, turn your phone off. What's one thing that you can just try in the next quarter or over the summer, whenever that may be?
I love that advice. And that is a great note for us to end on as we close our conversation here today. Everybody be thinking about your one thing, that you can tackle, maybe even the one person who you might pull into that one thing to get change moving, to get meaningful change happening in your community. This has been an incredible conversation with Katey McPherson here on The Sound Off. Thank you so much, Katey.
Thank you so much for having me.